Good evening, our loved listeners. Welcome to 2 million listeners heard him die, a mystery where our number one detective, Hercule Poirot, goes at it again. These are The Little Grey Cells, and thank you for joining me on tonight's story. But before we start, I would love to make an announcement. We took some time off to prepare something for our loyal, lovely listeners all over the world to thank you for your time and dedication. As a detective wears his suit and smart attire, we thought you might enjoy your own uniform and equipment for listening to our stories. That being said, you can now find our own apparel on Redbubble. From t-shirts, mugs for your tisane, clocks to track our uploads, hats so you feel like a true detective, to even journals to keep track of who is the main suspect. Just go into the link in the description. Pick a design you like, and all of the products will be listed. We want to thank you for the journey and hope that you will support us this way. Anyways, now let's get back to the story. Dim your lights, pour yourself a tisane, and prepare to exercise your own grey cells. Chapter 1. The Town That Keeps Its Faces. "It is a great misfortune," said the old woman behind the fruit stall, "that the gentleman has come to us in August." Hercule Poirot, who had been holding a peach to the light with the gravity of a jeweller examining a disputed stone, did not look up. "Madame astonishes me. August is warm, August is generous. In August, the peach is at last honest about itself." "In August," said the fruit seller, "everybody comes, and everybody is watched." She said it pleasantly, as one repeats a proverb about rain, and wrapped the peach in a twist of paper. Poirot paid her, and remarked afterwards, to nobody in particular, that it was a curious thing how often wisdom arrived disguised as small talk, and how rarely one recognized it in time. The market of Porto Miraggio spread along the harbour front in a long, disorderly ribbon of awnings. Honey-coloured houses climbed the hillside behind it in tiers, their shutters flung open, their balconies dripping with geraniums the colour of arterial blood. Below, fishing boats lay against the quay with a proprietorial air, unimpressed by the white yachts moored beside them. The bells of Santa Chiara rang the half-hour and were answered by gulls. The air smelled of lemons, of espresso, of hot stone and basil and tar. It was, Poirot conceded, very nearly perfect. He proved this to himself by conducting a small inspection of the vegetable stalls, where he found tomatoes arranged in a pyramid of such faultless symmetry that he stopped and regarded it for some moments with real pleasure. The stallholder, gratified, offered him one. Poirot declined with a bow. To take a tomato from such a pyramid would be to destroy it, and he had not travelled 600 miles to commit vandalism. At a shop in the Via di Fiori, he spent 10 minutes over a silk cravat, while the bookseller next door watched him from the doorway with open amusement. "All this," said the bookseller at last, "for a piece of cloth no wider than my hand." "Monsieur," said Poirot, settling the cravat at his throat and adjusting it by perhaps a 16th of an inch. "Order begins with the neck. A man who cannot govern his collar will not govern his affairs. Observe the great scandals of Europe. In every case, I assure you, the collar came first." He took his coffee afterwards at a table outside the Café Aurora, where the harbour lay before him, like something arranged by an artist of no great subtlety, but considerable enthusiasm. He was in excellent spirits. That morning the hotel had produced a boiled egg of exactly the correct consistency, an achievement which he had privately decided to regard as an omen. He was to speak that evening. A light after-dinner talk, 12 minutes no more, aboard the Orpheus Hour, the most celebrated live broadcast in Europe, transmitted tonight from the restored opera house of this small and radiant town. Nearly 2 million people would listen. Poirot had already selected which anecdote he would tell them and had rehearsed the pause before the final line. The proprietor of the café, a broad, warm, talkative man named Matteo Rossi, brought the coffee himself and stayed to explain the town. You see the road, signore? The coast road. There is only the one. Behind us, he tilted his head at the cliffs which rose sheer and sunburnt above the last row of roofs. Behind us, nothing. Goats. So everything comes in by that road or by the water. Beniamino at the harbour office writes down every boat. Every boat. And the fishermen, he laughed, the fishermen have nothing to do but look at faces. So that a stranger is remembered, said Poirot. A stranger is remembered for 30 years. Rossi wiped the table that did not need wiping. It is a very safe town, signore. Nobody disappears here. He went away to serve a party of Englishwomen, and Poirot sat with his coffee cooling and looked at the beautiful open sweep of the bay, and thought that Porto Miraggio was an island which had neglected to become one. Everything was visible. Everything was known. Nobody disappeared here. Unless, of course, somebody helped them. It was an idle thought, and he was faintly ashamed of it, as a man is ashamed of an ungracious remark about a hostess who has fed him well. At the corner of the piazza, a child was selling white carnations from a shallow basket. A girl of 11 or 12, dark, thin, quite silent. Poirot watched her without particular interest and observed, chiefly out of habit, that she passed the tourists by altogether and offered her flowers only to the townspeople, who bought them from her as though it were an arrangement of long standing. 2 tables away, a fair man in a grey suit sat with a folded newspaper and did not turn the page. Poirot paid, rose, and crossed the piazza towards the opera house, where a rehearsal was to begin at noon. He was halfway across when a young woman came through the crowd towards him. She came quickly, and she came directly, and she was not looking at the harbour or the church or the flower seller. She was looking at him. She was perhaps 28, dark hair pinned in haste, a very good coat, worn as though she had forgotten she had it on. There were shadows beneath her eyes that had not been made by one bad night. She stopped a pace in front of him and spoke his name. Not loudly, not as an admirer speaks it, but as one confirms a fact. Monsieur Poirot. Mademoiselle. She glanced past his shoulder, then, in a voice hardly above the noise of the gulls, "If someone dies while everyone is listening." She stopped. Her eyes moved again, quickly, to something or someone behind him. "Who hears the murder?" Poirot opened his mouth to reply. He did not reply because at that moment the procession of Santa Chiara came in from the Via del Porto. The choir first, then the candles, then the swaying blue canopy and the sweet grey drift of incense, and the whole piazza turned and pressed and reassembled itself around them. For 4 seconds, perhaps 5, Poirot could see nothing but the backs of the faithful and the wavering flames. The procession passed, the crowd loosened, the piazza returned. The young woman was gone. She had left something in the place where she had stood. On the hot flagstones, quite alone, sat a small, portable radio in a case of cracked brown leather. It was switched on. From it came a thin, bright, cheerful thread of dance music. And then the music dipped, and an announcer's voice said, with the smooth conviction of a man reading a card handed to him by somebody else, "Tonight's broadcast will be unforgettable." Then the dance music resumed. Poirot stood very still. He did not feel fear. He was not, whatever his enemies said of him, a nervous man. What he felt was something he trusted a great deal more than fear, and had learned, at some cost, never to argue with. He felt that a thing was wrong. He bent, with care for the crease of his trousers, and picked up the little radio. It was warm. It had been playing for some time. Across the piazza, at the corner where the flower seller had been standing, the shallow basket lay on the stones, and the white carnations had spilled out of it, and the child was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 2. The Machinery of a Voice. "You are 20 minutes early," said the young woman with the clipboard. "And in 11 years nobody has ever been early." She said it without looking up, and then she looked up, and Poirot had the pleasure, it was not entirely a pleasure, of watching a face rearrange itself into professional welcome. Monsieur Poirot, forgive me, Sophia Bellini, assistant producer. You are on at 22 minutes past 10. You have 12 minutes, and if you go to 13, the orchestra will hate you for the rest of their lives. Then I shall be brief, mademoiselle, and beloved. The Teatro Miraggio had been built in 1846 for an audience of 900 and restored, 40 years later, by a shipping family anxious to be forgiven. Poirot, entering from the wings, found himself in a small, gilded universe of crimson plush and plaster cherubs, all of it half-shrouded in dust sheets and smelling of varnish. Across this ancien régime, the 20th century had laid its cables. They ran everywhere, down the aisles, over the orchestra rail, taped in black bundles across the boards of the stage, disappearing at last through a hole cut without ceremony in a painted panel of nymphs. Poirot followed one of these cables with his eyes to the place where it ended, and reflected that it was a curious modern arrangement. 900 seats, and none of them mattered. What mattered was a black cylinder on a stand, no bigger than a bottle of hock, and the 2 million invisible persons on the other side of it. "Everyone does that," said Sophia. She had followed his gaze. "The first time. They look at the seats and then at the microphone, and they cannot make the two things agree." "And you, mademoiselle? Which do you believe in?" "I believe in the running order," said Sophia Bellini, and consulted her wristwatch. She consulted it, Poirot noted, 4 times in the next 6 minutes, which was 3 times more than the passage of 6 minutes could reasonably require. Twice, while speaking, she glanced over her shoulder towards the dark of the wings, not the swift, habitual glance of a woman who fears being overheard by her employer, but a slower and more searching look, as though she wished to be certain of the geography behind her. Over the back of a chair in the prompt corner lay a woman's coat, very good, pale, and thrown down as though its owner had forgotten she possessed it. Poirot said nothing about the coat. He said nothing about the piazza, or the procession, or the small, warm radio now sitting in the drawer of his hotel dressing table. He watched Sophia Bellini's face throughout a discussion of microphone height and found in it nothing at all. No flicker of recognition, no relief, no fear. Either she had never in her life seen him before that morning, or she was a young woman of most unusual quality. Poirot allowed himself, privately, to be interested. The sound engineer occupied a curtained box at the rear of the stalls, where the shipping family had once received its friends. 2 grey machines stood there on trestles, spooling brown tape between glass reels with a soft, patient, endless motion. The man beside them rose and offered a hand. Novak, Émile. He was perhaps 40, fair, with the pale, unhurried courtesy of Northern Europe. His French was excellent and entirely without music. He wore no jacket. His shirt sleeves were folded twice, precisely, and the folds were equal. "You record the program, monsieur? But it is broadcast live." "Everything is recorded." Novak touched one of the reels with the back of a finger, checking its run as a man checks a horse's flank. "The ministry requires it. The sponsors require it. And afterwards, if a thing is wanted for the archive," he made a small movement of the hand, economical, final, "then one edits." "One edits what, monsieur?" "A cough, a door, a man who says the wrong name and corrects himself." Novak looked up, and his eyes were mild and grey and rested on Poirot with perfect steadiness. 12 seconds, and it never happened. The tape is not a witness, Monsieur Poirot. It is only a memory that can be persuaded. And no one hears the difference? No one has ever heard the difference, said Émile Novak. Gabriel Armand arrived at 1:45, and the building changed. Poirot had heard that voice in Brussels, in Lyon,
in a hotel lounge at X where 3 strangers had stopped talking to listen to it.
In the flesh, Armand was tall, silver at the temples, dressed with a carelessness that had plainly cost money, and he came down the aisle scattering greetings like a man distributing alms. The lighting boy by name, the orchestra by their instruments, Sophia with a hand laid briefly on her shoulder. He greeted Poirot as an old friend, which they were not, and did it so agreeably that Poirot found himself charmed and made a note to distrust it. Then the rehearsal began, and Armand read 4 minutes of introduction into the black cylinder, and the thing was suddenly not charm at all. It was a warm, unhurried, confiding voice that placed itself an inch from the ear and made of 2 million strangers a single friend. He finished. He handed the pages to Sophia, and he did not speak again for 40 minutes. That was what Poirot remembered afterwards. Off the air, Gabriel Armand sat in the 4th row with his hands on his knees and said nothing whatever, while the town's most celebrated voice went about the auditorium in other people's mouths. Only once, passing Poirot in the corridor, did he stop. "Tell me, a man says a thing to 2 million people at once." He was smiling. His eyes were not. "Is it truer than if he had said it to one?" "It is louder, monsieur." "Yes," said Armand. "That is what I thought too." And he went on to his dressing room. Poirot walked back through the afternoon heat and found the child at the corner of the piazza, her basket recovered, her flowers reduced to 11. She had run, she said, because of the procession. She did not care for the candles. She accepted his lira without gratitude and with great dignity. "Mademoiselle sells only to the town," said Poirot, "never to the visitors. Why?" "The visitors buy roses," said Rosa, with contempt. "And the white ones? Who buys the white?" For the first time the child looked at him properly. "A gentleman. Every week, since the spring. He pays for 6 and takes none of them." She shrugged. "He says, leave them at the harbour office, and he brings his own thread for the stems, because mine is green, and he does not like green." "What colour is his thread, mon enfant?" "Black," said Rosa. Inspector Luca Ferry, encountered at 6 on the terrace of the Café Aurora, was a large, placid man who listened to the story of the radio with the indulgence of a doctor hearing about a sea-bathing cure. "Signore, in this town we have 2 crimes, nets and wives." He spread his hands over the harbour, the light, the church, the whole indefensible beauty of it. "Nobody is murdered in Porto Naraggio." "Not yet," agreed Poirot politely. At 7:30, in the dressing room with the good mirror, Gabriel Armand was handed an envelope which had been left at the stage door by nobody in particular. He opened it standing up. Inside was a single white carnation and a line of handwriting in ink so black it had blotted, "Millions will hear the truth." Armand looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he laughed, said something light about admirers, put the flower in his buttonhole, and went down to be magnificent. Chapter 3. Dead Air. 2 minutes, said Sophia Bellini, and after that, the world. The dinner had been long, and the speeches short, which Poirot considered the correct arrangement, and by 9:30 the foyer of the Teatro Miraggio had emptied itself into the auditorium. 900 people sat in crimson plush beneath the plaster cherubs. They had been instructed, twice, not to applaud until the red lamp went out, and they were already disobeying in whispers. Poirot had spent the dinner at the sponsors' table, 3 places from Gabriel Armand, and had observed 2 things. The first was that Armand did not drink. A waiter poured him wine at 8 o'clock, and at 10 minutes past 10, for Poirot afterwards established the hour with some care, the glass stood exactly where it had been left, full to the same thread of light. The second was the tin. It was flat, silver, no larger than a visiting card, and it came out of the breast pocket 4 times in the course of the evening.
Each time Armand took from it a single white pastille, placed it beneath his tongue, and continued talking with the tin still open in his hand, as a man does with a thing he has done for 30 years. "For the throat," said the sponsor's wife on Poirot's left, delighted to explain. "Always before he speaks. It is famous. There was a photograph of it in Paris Soir." The carnation in Armand's buttonhole had begun, by then, to go brown at the edges.
The announce position had been built into the stage left wing where the old prompt box had stood. A small, soundproofed room with a glazed front, so that the man inside could see the orchestra and the orchestra could see the man. It held a table, a chair, a carafe, and the black cylinder on its stand. The door opened into the wing itself, in full view of the stage manager's desk, and at that desk, from 9:45 onwards, sat Sophia Bellini, with the running order in front of her and a pencil in her hand. Emile Novak was at the back of the stalls behind his curtain, with the reels turning. At 10:02, the red lamp came on. There was music first, a waltz, taken rather too fast, and then the voice came into the room, and Poirot, standing in the wings 6 feet from the glass, watched a strange thing happen. 900 people leaned forward towards a man who was not speaking to any of them. Armand was superb. He had a story about a customs officer at Ventimiglia, which was certainly untrue and quite unimprovable. He had the orchestra. He had, somewhere out beyond the black cylinder, the fishing villages and the tenements and the lit windows of half of Europe, 2 million of them, sitting still. At 10:18, he began upon Poirot. "And if you have ever wondered, mesdames, messieurs, what becomes of a man who has looked into the worst that we are, I can tell you, for he is standing 8 feet from me, and he has spent the afternoon in a quarrel with our hotel about the temperature of the water for shaving." Laughter. Poirot inclined his head to nobody and permitted himself to be pleased. "A small man. A very great one. I have known him for—" The sentence stopped. It did not trail away, as a man's voice does when he loses his place. It stopped as a thing stops when it is cut. 2 seconds of nothing. Then, through the loudspeaker slung above the wings and through 2 million wireless sets from Oslo to Palermo, came a sound that no one who heard it ever afterwards described in the same words. Poirot, who had heard men die, thought of a door being forced. It was the sound of a man attempting, with great violence and no success, to breathe. It went on for perhaps 11 seconds. Then the crash, the chair, the carafe, the microphone stand going over, an appalling, ringing blow amplified across a continent. Then nothing at all. The orchestra had stopped playing. Nobody in the auditorium moved. The red lamp burned steadily above the proscenium, and the dead air went out to Europe and went on going out. And Poirot, turning to look, because in that moment it seemed to him the more important thing, saw that the tape reels behind the curtain at the back of the stalls were still turning, and that 38 seconds passed before the gramophone music came up to cover the silence. 38 seconds is a very long time in the wireless. It is longer still if one is counting. The door of the announce room opened outwards, and it had not been locked. Sophia reached it first, and the stage manager a pace behind her, and they had to lift it against the weight of the man lying across the threshold. Gabriel Armand lay on his side, with one arm flung out. His face had gone a dull brick colour. The mouth was open. The eyes were open. A doctor came up from the 4th row of the stalls, knelt, and after a very short time stood again and said what everyone had already understood. Poirot did not go into the room. He stood in the doorway with his hands behind his back and looked, and made the others stand behind him, and for 4 minutes he said nothing whatever, which those who did not know him took for shock. He was looking at the carafe, unbroken on its side in a spreading pool, at the chair, At the black cylinder lying on the boards, with its cable still coiling away through the floor. At the buttonhole of the dead man's dinner jacket, in which a white carnation, brown at the edges, remained neatly pinned. And at the second carnation. It lay 6 inches from Armand's open hand, on the floor, quite fresh. Its stem had been wrapped for 3 inches in thread. Black thread, wound tightly and evenly, in a manner suggesting neither haste nor sentiment, but simply the habit of a man accustomed to binding things. Poirot crouched. With a pencil, and touching nothing else, he parted the petals. Folded into the white heart of the flower was a strip of ruled paper 1.5 inches long, cut with scissors from a larger sheet. Upon it, in ink, 4 handwritten notes. Poirot did not need to hum them. Any child of Europe raised within earshot of a church had them by heart. The 4 descending notes upon which the Dies Irae opens. The day of wrath. The day of judgment. When whatever has been hidden shall be brought out and read aloud. He remained crouched a long moment. Once before, and long ago, a man had left fragments of music at the scene of his work, and Poirot had hanged him for it. But that man had left Chopin. He had never left this, which meant that either the dead had learned a new tune, or somebody had studied the case with great attention and made one small, deliberate alteration. That, thought Poirot, is not a signature. That is a sentence addressed to me. Inspector Luca Ferry arrived at 25 minutes to 11, and he was not placid any longer. He was pale, and he took off his hat inside the building, and he said, twice, that this was not possible. No one entered, signore. Bellini was at the desk. 4 persons had the door in view from the moment the lamp went on. 4. Nobody went in, and nobody came out. Precisely, said Poirot. It was not necessary that anyone should. He rose and looked once more into the little glazed room where the world's most famous voice had stopped in the middle of a sentence and asked his first question of the investigation. The silver tin, Inspector. The pastiples for the throat. He took one before he spoke. He took one always. Be so good as to find it for me. They searched the room and the body, and the corridor, and the carafe's pool of water, and the pockets of the dinner jacket that still wore its withered flower. There was no silver tin anywhere in Porto Miraggio. Chapter 4. The conversation begins. 900 witnesses, and not one of them had seen anything whatever. It was perfectly true, and it was the whole of the difficulty. They were let out in threes between midnight and 2:30, each giving a name, an address, and a statement of no value. The fishermen went first, down the hill in their good shirts, unwilling to talk even to one another. The mayor's cousin from Genoa wept in the foyer and had to be given brandy. By 3 o'clock the Teatro Miraggio held only policemen, and the plaster cherubs looked down upon a great many cigarette ends. The police surgeon, a dry little man from Rapallo, who had been fetched out of bed, came out of the announce-room drawing on his gloves. "Bitter almonds," he said. "Do not quote me until Tuesday, but bitter almonds." "Rapid?" "Seconds, 10, 12. He would have known. That is the pity of it. He would have had time to understand what was happening to him, and no time at all to say so." Poirot thought of a man tearing at a breath in front of 2 million people, and said nothing. "By the mouth," the surgeon added, from the doorway. "There is nothing in the water. I have smelt the carafe and the glass and the floor. Whatever he took dry." So the tin. Poirot set it out for Ferry on the back of a programme, in his small, upright hand, because a difficulty written down is a difficulty halved. Armand had used the tin 4 times at dinner and been seen doing it by 9 people. He had entered the announce-room at 8 minutes to 10 with the tin in his breast pocket. The dresser had seen it go in, and Sophia had seen the shape of it against the cloth as he passed her desk. He had died at 19 minutes past 10. The tin was not in the room, not on the body, not in the corridor, not in the drains, and not in any pocket searched by the police that night. "Then it walked," said Ferry bitterly. "It was carried, mon ami. Consider the 4 minutes after the crash. In those 4 minutes, 11 persons were in the doorway or within reach of it. Mademoiselle Bellini, the stage manager, the boy with the headphones, the doctor from the stalls, 2 orchestral players, the dresser, Signor Rossi, who came down the aisle with everybody else, yourself, and 2 of your own officers. Poirot laid the pencil down precisely parallel to the edge of the programme. One of those 11 stooped and took and put in a pocket. It required perhaps a second and a half. It required also that a person should be thinking clearly at a moment when 900 people were not. Or, said Ferry, the tin never went into the room at all, and the dresser and the Bellini girl are both mistaken about a shape under a piece of cloth. Poirot looked at him with a new respect. Bien, you improve, Inspector, yes. That also is possible, and I do not yet know which of the 2 it is. And until I know it, I shall be very poor company. The notebook was found at 4 in the morning, in the pocket of Gabriel Armand's overcoat, hanging on the back of the dressing-room door, beneath a photograph of himself aged 30. It was a small black book, of the kind sold for shopping lists. Most of it was engagements, laundry, and the names of wines. On the last written page, in a hand that had grown untidy, were 5 entries. Porto Miraggio, struck through with a single line. Beneath it 4 more. A cathedral city in Provence, a spa in the Austrian mountains, a university town on the Rhine, and, last, a broadcasting house in Paris. Each carried a date. The dates were 7 days apart. It is the anniversary tour, said Sophia. She had refused to go home. She sat on a packing case in the wings with her coat at last around her shoulders and a cup of coffee she did not drink. 20 years of the Orpheus Hour. 5 broadcasts, 5 cities, announced in April. It is in every newspaper in Europe. And the crossing out, mademoiselle? Gabriel struck out a place when it was done. She turned the page with one finger, not touching it otherwise, having learned quickly. He liked to see them go. He struck it out, said Poirot gently, before it was done. This page was written before 10 o'clock tonight. Sophia Bellini looked at the little black book for a long moment, and did not say anything at all. And Poirot observed that she had stopped looking over her shoulder. Fear, he reflected, is a thing that arrives and departs. And when it departs before the danger does, it is generally because it has been replaced by something worse. At 9 the next morning, the telephone in the manager's office began to ring, and continued, at intervals, for 3 days. The sponsors telephoned from Milan. The ministry telephoned from Rome. A gentleman from Paris telephoned to say that the anniversary broadcasts were an affair of national prestige, that 4 governments had approved the schedule, that the programme had continued through influenza, revolution, and 1 war, and that it would be an insult to the memory of Gabriel Armand to abandon it now. Nobody used the word cancel. Everybody meant it, and nobody would say it. And by Thursday it was understood that the tour would proceed. 4 broadcasts, said Ferry, holding his head. 4 cities, 4 countries, and a man who murders in front of 2 million people. 4 dates, Poirot corrected him. Which is worse, because a date is a promise. He has told us where he will be and when. It is the most insolent thing I have ever been shown. And it is also the first mistake, though I cannot yet say why. He took the old rehearsal room behind the scene dock, which had a stove, a long table, and a wall of unpainted plaster, and he took it without asking. By Friday, the wall carried the seating plan of the Teatro Miraggio, the running order, the police photographs, a chart of the 31 minutes drawn to scale, and 11 portraits pinned in a row with string running between them. Every passport in the company lay in a shoebox on the table. Nobody left Porto Miraggio. The harbour master had his instructions and enjoyed them enormously. Ferry, arriving with the harbour office ledger under his arm, found Poirot standing before the wall with his hands folded, quite motionless. The flowers, signore. The white carnations. Every week since April. They were left with old Beniamino for the poste restante, 6 at a time, paid in advance. He opened the ledger. They were never collected, not once, and they were addressed always to the same name. Which is? Marek, A. Marek. Ferry shrugged the shrug of a man at the end of a wasted errand. There is no Marek in this province, signore. There has never been a Marek. I have looked. Poirot took the ledger and studied the name, written each week in ink so black it had blotted. Someone, he said, has been sending flowers to a man who is not there, every week, for 4 months. It is either lunacy, Inspector, or it is grief. And in my experience, the two are not always to be distinguished by the handwriting. He pinned the page to the wall. The murderer has begun a conversation, he said. Eh bien, we shall answer. He answered it that afternoon by asking Emil Novak to play him the tape. They sat in the curtained box while the reels ran the whole 31 minutes. The waltz, the customs officer at Ventimiglia, the laughter, the stopped sentence, the 11 seconds, the crash, the 38 seconds of dead air. Again, said Poirot. The other channel, if you please. Novak's hands moved among the switches without hesitation. The Q circuit. It is not transmitted. Only the presenter hears it, in his headphones. The producer speaks to him, tells him to hurry, tells him to stop. It is recorded also? Everything is recorded. The second reel began. For 17 minutes, there was nothing but Sophia's voice, brisk and low, giving times. Then, at 17 minutes past 10, 2 minutes before the end of Gabriel Armand, a whisper came into the little room, so close and so quiet that Ferry put out a hand and gripped the edge of the table. The first voice was never the intended one. The reels turned on. Nobody spoke. Monsieur Novak, said Poirot at last, who is able to speak upon that circuit? I am, said Emile Novak pleasantly. And so is Mademoiselle Bellini. And so, if he knows which key to press, is anybody who has ever stood in the wings of this theatre for 5 minutes together. Chapter 5. Who Emptied the Ashtray? The gentlemen from Milan who represented the sponsors have been waiting in the corridor for 50 minutes and had twice sent in his card. Poirot was interviewing a woman named Concetta, who cleaned the theatre from 5 until 7 and had done so since the Restoration, and who wished it understood at the outset that she had never in her life touched anything. Madame, you are the only person in this building who knows where things belong. The announce room. At what hour did you leave it? 6. Always 6. After 6 come the men with the cables, and then there is no more cleaning, only walking about. It was in order? It was in order, said Concetta, with a sniff at the notion of any alternative. The table wiped, the carafe filled, the glass turned down, the floor swept, and the ashtray emptied, though nobody ever used it, because Signor Armand did not smoke and would not have it near him. He said smoke costs a man 3 notes at the top. This ashtray, where does it live? On the shelf, under the table. It is tin. It came out of the old prompt box. Thank you, madame. You have been of more use to me than the gentleman in the corridor is likely to be. He saw her out himself, and after her the lamp boy, and after him 2 carpenters, the girl who had folded 400 programs, and old Beniamino from the harbour office. The gentleman from Milan was received at 20 minutes past 1 and given 11 minutes, which Poirot considered handsome. You question the servants before the directors, said Ferry when the corridor had at last emptied. I question the people who move objects. A director moves opinions, and opinions leave no fingerprints upon anything. Poirot was turning a pencil end over end upon the long table. Who polished the microphone? Who filled the carafe? Who carried the flowers from the foyer on Tuesday and carried them back on Wednesday? Those are the persons who have handled this crime already, without knowing that they did so. The ash was found on the second morning by Poirot upon his knees. It lay in the join between two boards beneath the announce room table. A fine grey thread of it, no longer than a thumbnail, and in the shadow of the shelf leg, a match burnt half its length. "Swept at 6, said Poirot, rising with some difficulty and attending to his knee. "The room was clean at 6. At 8 minutes to 10 there entered it a man who did not smoke. Inspector, the ashtray. It is tin. It is beneath the table, and I should like it." It was brought. It was empty and clean, and it smelled very faintly of tobacco. Voilà. Poirot set it down and regarded it as though it had made a remark. Someone smoked in that room between 6 o'clock and 10, and that someone did not drop his ash upon the floor, being a person of decent habit. He used the tray provided, and afterwards he emptied it and wiped it and returned it to the shelf where it belongs. A young officer in the doorway observed cheerfully that a man might empty an ashtray from mere tidiness. "A man might," said Poirot, with a sharpness that startled the room. "And a man might also empty it because within it lies the single proof that he stood a quarter of an hour in a place he has assured you he never entered. Do not explain a fact away, monsieur, before you have troubled to find out what it is. It is the vice of the age." The officer turned scarlet. Poirot stopped. He passed a hand across his moustache and was ashamed of himself. "Forgive me. I have slept 4 hours in 2 nights, which is no excuse, and I have been discourteous to a young man doing his work, which is less of one." "You will accept the apology of an old man?" "Signor, bien." He sat down and folded his hands and said quietly, to nobody in particular, "Who emptied the ashtray?" It was Matteo Rossi. He came up from the café of his own accord that afternoon, sweating in his good jacket, and told it all in a rush, that he had brought the coffee at 8:30, as he had brought it for 11 seasons, that Signor Armand had not been there, that he had waited, because a tray must be put into somebody's hands and not left about, that he had smoked 1 cigar, which was a wickedness, and had emptied the tray afterwards and polished it with his handkerchief so that Concetta should never know. "How long, monsieur?" 15 minutes, 20. Rossi spread his hands wide. "Signore, I am not a fool. I hear how it sounds. But if I had put poison in that man's coffee, he would have died at 9 o'clock in an empty room, and where is the sense in that?" This one wanted an audience. "That," said Poirot, "is the most intelligent observation anyone has made to me since Tuesday. Sit down, Signor Rossi. In those 20 minutes, who came to the door?" Rossi thought about it, honestly, which few witnesses do. "The boy, for the spare headphones. The dresser, twice. And the engineer, the fair one. Novak. He came in and knelt at the wall and did something to the cable and went away again. 2 minutes, no more. He said good evening. He said the cable had been trodden on. And when you left the room, what stood upon the table?" "The carafe. The glass turned down. The pages." Rossi hesitated, and then said in an altogether different voice, "And there was a flower." The pencil stopped turning. "Upon the table?" "Lying beside the pages. A white one, quite fresh, tied at the stem with black. I thought it was sent up from the foyer, for his coat." Poirot's voice did not alter by anything at all. "And when you came in, monsieur?" "When you set down the tray." Rossi opened his mouth and shut it, and went a shade greyer beneath the sunburn. "There was nothing on that table but the pages," he said. "Signore, I put the tray where the flower was. I would swear it on my mother. It was not there at 8:30. He looked from one man to the other and understood what he had said. "It came into that room," said Matteo Rossi, "while I was sitting in it." When he had gone, Poirot stood for some time at the window, with his hands behind his back. 20 minutes, he said.
And 3 persons at that door. A boy who fetched a pair of headphones and did not cross the threshold. A dresser who came twice and stood in the doorway both times, being afraid of the room. And a man who came in and knelt, and had a reason so good that a witness has volunteered it for him without being asked. He turned round. Note it, Inspector, and say nothing to anybody.
It is the first honest thing this affair has given me, and I do not propose to frighten it. Sophia Bellini broke that evening, in the rehearsal room, upon a question that had nothing to do with the murder. Poirot had asked her why Gabriel Armand should have crossed out the name of a town before the town was done with. She looked at the wall, the seating plan, the photographs, the ledger page with its unclaimed flowers, and something in her gave way, quietly, without any drama at all, as a rope parts. Because he was not going on. Mademoiselle? He meant Porter Miraggio to be the last of them. Her hands lay flat upon the table, and she spoke to them. He told me on Sunday. He said, "After this one, Sophia, they will not want me in Provence or anywhere else, and you are to be ready for it, and you are not to defend me, because you will be told that I have gone mad." He intended to say something upon the air? Yes. Politics. No, she almost laughed. Nothing so comfortable. She was quiet a moment. My parents died when I was 9. Gabriel paid for the school and the shoes and later for the work, and he never once permitted me to thank him. 6 weeks ago he came back from Milan with a box of old discs, and he was grey in the face. He said he had found a thing that had lain in an archive nearly 30 years, with the wrong name written on the sleeve. What name? He would not tell me. He said that knowing it had already cost one man everything, and he did not propose to spend me as well. She raised her head. But he told me the shape of it. Long ago, a man took another man's whole life, not his money, his life. The work, the name, the reputation, the family that came afterwards. He put it on and he wore it. He is respected to this day wherever he is, and every single thing he is respected for belonged to somebody else. The thief lives? Gabriel said the thief was alive, and the robbed man was not, and that the law had looked at it once long ago and yawned. Her voice did not shake. And he said one thing more. He said, sometimes murder begins a long while before anybody dies. Poirot did not interrupt her, and wrote nothing, and permitted the silence to stay as long as it wished. Then he said, in the tone of a man remarking upon the weather, "On the Tuesday morning, mademoiselle, in the piazza, you were wearing a pale coat. You are wearing it now. It is a very good coat, and you carry it as though you had forgotten you possessed it, which is a rarer thing than you suppose." Sophia Bellini put her hands over her face. "I lost my nerve," she said, from behind them. "You asked me a question, and did not stay for the answer. I had been awake since 4. I had decided 6 times to tell you everything, and 6 times decided that I should sound like a hysterical girl, and then I saw you in the market buying a cravat." She made a small sound that was not quite laughter. "And I thought, he is real, he is here, and I went straight across to you. And then I heard myself saying it. And it sounded exactly as mad as I had known it would. And you fled into a procession. I felt somebody looking at me." She lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry and perfectly steady. "I could not tell you who. I have gone over that piazza in my head every night since, and there is nothing in it. 100 people and candles and the choir. But I have worked 11 years in a business where one is always being looked at, monsieur, and one knows the difference. You left a wireless set at my feet. Gabriel's, the spare. I was carrying it down to be mended." She shrugged, exhausted. "I did not leave it. I dropped it. And afterwards, at the theatre, when you came in and I had to look at you, I could not begin it again in front of 6 people with a stopwatch in my hand. So I behaved as though I had never seen you in my life, and I have been ashamed of it ever since."
Poirot considered her for a moment. "The announcer upon that wireless," he said, "informed me that the evening's broadcast would be unforgettable." "Yes, he said it every hour, all day, for a fortnight." She looked up. "That was the publicity department in Milan, monsieur. Nobody arranged it." "No," said Poirot. "Nobody arranged it. That is the one thing in this affair which was innocent, and it is the only part of it I shall dream about." Then he asked, very gently, whether she still had her copy of Tuesday's running order. She had. It was folded in the pocket of the pale coat, where it had lain since the lamp went red. 9 items typed. Item 8 at 22 minutes past 10. H.
Poirot 12. And beneath it, Item 9, added afterwards in Gabriel Armand's own untidy ink. 9. G.A. alone, 13. No music, in memoriam. Poirot read it twice. Then he rose and pinned it to the plaster wall, beside the page of the harbour ledger with its 4 months of white carnations, addressed to a man nobody could find. "Somebody in this town," he said, "has been in mourning since April." He considered the 2 papers, hanging side by side. "And on Tuesday night, at last, there was a funeral." Chapter 6. The Shop Window. 22 kilometres, said the man at the garage, and he brought it back with the tank half empty and the wings white as a miller. The garage stood at the top of the town, where the coast road came in, and its proprietor kept his accounts in a child's exercise book, which Poirot considered an excellent system, since a child's exercise book cannot be edited without leaving a mess. Gabriel Armand had hired the Fiat 3 times in a fortnight. Monday the 8th, 22 kilometres. Thursday the 11th, 22. Monday the 15th, the day before he died, 22 again. "Always the same number," said Ferry. "Always the same journey, 11 out and 11 home, upon a road that goes to one place and comes back from it." Poirot closed the exercise book. "And the white dust, Inspector. Where in this province does a motor car acquire white dust?" Ferry did not have to think. He had grown up 11 kilometres from where he stood. "The limestone cutting, below the old wireless station." The Ligurian Wireless Company had put its relay upon the cliff in the years when a mast on a headland was a kind of cathedral, and had abandoned it, with the indifference of companies, when a better mast was raised at Genoa. What remained was a long, low building of grey stone, with a rusted lattice tower above it, standing in wild fennel, with the whole Mediterranean laid out beneath like an accusation. The door had a padlock. The padlock had been oiled. Inside there was dust everywhere, and everything in the world was in it. On a trestle table in the main room lay files opened, photographs arranged, letters bound with tape, and 3 reels of recording tape set out in a row. There was a bundle of newspaper cuttings, nearly 30 years old, folded to show the relevant columns. There was a bank paying-in book. There was a photograph of a young Gabriel Armand, dark-haired, thin, unrecognizably eager, standing beside a man whose face had been carefully scratched away. Ferry went at it like a starving man. In 4 minutes he had established that the papers appeared to show Gabriel Armand receiving money, in the year the cuttings described, from a company involved in a scandal Poirot had never heard of, that the photograph placed him with persons unknown, and that here, at last, was a motive for somebody to have killed him. "Signore, this is everything." "Yes," said Poirot sadly. "That is what is the matter with it." He had not moved from the doorway. He was looking at the table. "Consider the dust, Inspector. It lies upon the floor, upon the window ledges, upon the chairs, thick as felt. And upon that table, nothing, not a grain. Consider the arrangement. The cuttings folded to the column one is to read, the photograph placed uppermost, the files open, not merely present, but opened, so that a man may take them in from the door and not be delayed by having to look. He came forward at last and touched nothing. This is not evidence, mon ami. It is a shop window. Somebody has dressed it and stood back and adjusted it and gone away pleased. But the tapes, the tapes. Poirot bent over the 3 reels in their row. The tapes are the mistake. This station closed before you were breached. In those days, a sound was cut upon a disc of wax and afterwards upon shellac, and this ribbon of brown paper and iron did not exist anywhere in Europe. It is new, Inspector. It is not merely modern. It is this year. He straightened, and for a moment there was no sound at all but the fennel moving against the wall outside. And a man who lays a trap with the wrong bait, said Poirot slowly, is a man who has known one kind of machinery so long that he has forgotten other men do not. Above their heads, a floorboard spoke. Ferry had his revolver half out when Poirot's hand closed on his wrist with surprising strength, and Poirot's other hand indicated, without any hurry at all, the tall iron cabinet standing open against the inner wall. They were inside it, and the door drawn to within an inch before the footsteps reached the stair. Whoever came down slowly. He was not in flight, he was working. They heard him cross to the table. They heard the small, clean sounds of paper being squared, and a chair moved. And then the footsteps went about the room in a pattern that Poirot, listening in the dark with his cheek against cold iron, recognized with a curious detachment. A search. Systematic, left to right, the way a man reads a page. The footsteps came to the cabinet. A hand took the edge of the door. For perhaps 4 seconds the door was held. Poirot, who was 61 and had not been afraid of very much for 30 years, discovered that his mouth had gone entirely dry and thought, absurdly, of the boiled egg at the Hotel Miramar and of Sophia Bellini's face when she spoke of her shoes being paid for. The hand released the door. The footsteps went out. The padlock clicked. A motor started somewhere below the cutting and diminished along the coast road. They gave it 90 seconds. They were 40 meters up the fennel slope, in the white glare, with Ferry swearing steadily and Poirot's dignity 3/4 abandoned, when the old relay station of the Ligurian Wireless Company lifted its roof, sat down again, and became a heap of grey stone and burning paper. The blast took Poirot off his feet. He was assisted up. He observed, when he could hear again, that his cravat was not merely disordered, but destroyed, and that this seemed to him, at that moment, a very great insolence. "He meant to kill us," said Ferry, shaking. "No." Poirot was looking down at the smoke. "He held the door of that cabinet, Inspector, and he let it go. He knew. He wished us to see the shop window, and then he wished the shop window to be gone beyond recovery, so that for a week or a month we should chase the ghost of a dead man's dishonesty." He found his stick. "He does not want me dead. He wants me occupied." The ferry left the mole at 7, as it did every evening, and carried the people who lived along the coast home from the market. Rosa was aboard with her basket, 3 carnations unsold. Sophia Bellini was to have been aboard also, having arranged that morning, and in front of 6 people, to go out to Cervo to see Armand's sister, and had been kept back at 6:30 by a telephone call from Milan that lasted 40 minutes and was, when Poirot inquired afterwards, about nothing whatever. Poirot was on the mole when the ferry cast off. He saw the boat swing and heard the engine note, and saw the helmsman's face change, and afterwards was unable to say precisely what it was that he had understood, except that he had understood it before he could name it. The steering had gone. The rudder linkage, examined next day, had been cut most of the way through and left to finish itself. She went down on the rocks under the light in a rising sea. Poirot went along the mole faster than he had gone anywhere in 15 years. got hold of a child's arm over the gap between stone and gunwale, and hauled her up bodily with a strength he did not know he had kept. 20 seconds later, the boat struck. There were no deaths, 2 broken arms, a great deal of screaming, and 1 small girl sitting on the mole in a puddle of seawater, entirely silent, holding her basket. In the basket, among 3 carnations tied with green thread, lay a 4th. It was white and quite fresh, and it was bound at the stem with black. She had not put it there. She had sold nothing since 4 o'clock, and she said so, with the flat certainty of a professional, and nobody who saw her face doubted it. Poirot crouched beside her on the wet stone. Above them, the town was running down to the harbour with lamps, and Ferry was shouting for rope, and out on the rocks the ferry was breaking up quietly. The child was not the target, said Poirot. Sophia had come out along the mole. She stopped when she heard him. And that, said Poirot, without turning round, is infinitely worse. Chapter 7. What nobody was watching. Sophia Bellini put the tin on the table between them at 9:30 on the Sunday morning and did not offer any explanation, because Poirot had told her, 30 seconds earlier, and quite without heat, exactly what she had done and why. He had spoken of ruin, he said. He had told you that you would hear he had gone mad, and that you were not to defend him. Then you came into that room and found him dead of poison, and there lay against the leg of the overturned chair, a yard from his hand, the little silver tin he had carried for 20 years. And you thought, for perhaps 2 seconds, mademoiselle, and 2 seconds is all that is ever required, that he had done it himself. Yes. And you could not endure that they should say so. I could not endure, said Sophia, that 2 million people should be told, in that voice they use for it, that Gabriel Armand had killed himself on the air out of vanity, or drink, or a woman. He was not permitted to be sad in public. He was a personality. She looked at the tin, worn silver at the corners. So I picked it up and put it in my sleeve, and then the doctor came, and then it was too late to give it back without being a liar as well as a fool. I have had it in my shoe for 6 days. You have obstructed the police of 2 countries, said Poirot, and you have destroyed the one advantage we possessed, which was that the murderer did not know how much we knew. And in your place I should probably have done precisely the same. Which is a most inconvenient thing for me to have to say. Inspector, be so good as to send that to Genoa this morning. The analyst's telegram came back on Monday. Of the 11 pastilles remaining, 9 were of nothing but honey, glycerine, and menthol. 2 carried enough prussic acid to kill a horse. They were the 2 lying nearest the hinge. He was right-handed, said Poirot, and a man of habit, and he opened that tin 4 times at dinner in front of 9 people. Observe him. He takes always from the near side, from the front, the same as a man takes a cigarette. The poison lay at the back, beneath, against the hinge, where it would rise to the surface only when the tin was nearly done. Then the hour of his death was not chosen, mon ami. It could not be chosen. It could only be waited for. Poirot set down the telegram very gently. Somebody put death into that tin. A week ago, a month ago, in Milan, in a corridor, at a dinner, one does not know. And then went away and lived his life and waited for a man of regular habits to arrive at the bottom of it. And it happened, as such things do, at the worst hour that could be imagined. Or the best. He had begun, in the days since the ferry, to collect the small news of the wireless world, and it had accumulated in a cardboard folder on the long table, like something washed up by a slow tide. A fire in a storage annex at Turin in March. 200 master discs, pre-war, destroyed. A flood in the sub-basement of the ministry vault at Rome in April, traced to a burst standpipe, ruining a further 400. A lorry carrying archive material from Marseille to Lyon in May, which had left the road at night on a dry bend, burnt out, driver unhurt. A cellar at Genoa condemned in June for damp. Nobody had put these things together because there was nothing to put together. Wax degrades, shellac warps, cellars flood, and lorries leave roads, and old recordings are a nuisance to everybody who is obliged to house them. "There is more," said Sophia, and laid the requisition book beside the folder. Every disc drawn from the Orpheus Hour archive was signed for. Every disc condemned as unplayable was signed for also by the engineer of the day, whose certificate was required and never questioned, because no producer alive could tell a ruined surface from a good one by looking at it. Since February, 161 condemnations, all pre-war, all signed in a small, level, unhurried hand, and one requisition, 6 weeks old, in a large, untidy one. Dies Armand, Milan Repository, 12 items 1898 to 1912. The 12 items had gone home with him in a wooden box. The box was not in his rooms, nor at the theatre, nor in the cellar of the Hotel Miramare, nor anywhere in Porto Miraggio. It had gone into the shop window on the cliff, along with everything else, and come out of it as smoke over the sea. Poirot sat for a long while without speaking. Then he got up and walked the length of the plaster wall, the seating plan, the chart of 31 minutes drawn to scale, the 11 portraits with their string, the harbour ledger, item 9 with its in memoriam, and he looked at all of it as a man looks at a house he has built in the wrong field.
"Inspector, from the first hour, what has this murderer done? He has killed in front of 2 million witnesses. He has left a flower and a thread and 4 notes of music and a whisper upon a circuit that he knew we should find, since he told me himself that everything is recorded. He has laid me a trap upon a cliff and blown it up beneath my nose. He has cut a rudder in a harbour.
He has given us a notebook with 4 cities in it and 4 dates 7 days apart, so that 4 governments should sit up all night. "He is a lunatic," said Ferry. "He performs." "He is nothing of the kind." Poirot's voice had gone very quiet. "Every single one of those acts points at a stage. Not one of them has ever pointed at a cupboard in Rome, or a damp cellar in Genoa, or a form signed in a small hand certifying that a disc is beyond saving. While we have run about a theatre asking who moved the flowers, while I have asked, with such satisfaction, who emptied the ashtray, the memory of 30 years has been going quietly into the fire, room by room, all over Europe, with a receipt for every item." He was silent a moment. "He does not wish to be famous, Inspector. He wishes to be unwatched. And to be unwatched, he has given us the loudest murder in the history of the world." Ferry said slowly, "Then Armand was killed for what he had found." "Armand was killed because on Tuesday night, at 34 minutes past 10, before 2 million people, he intended to play them a recording made 28 years ago and tell them what name was truly upon it. One broadcast, one voice, from a year when almost nobody was listening. It has been sought since February in 161 condemnations, and it has not been found, because Gabriel Armand had already found it, and carried it to a cliff and hidden it among 11 others of no consequence." Poirot's hand closed slowly. "And on Saturday, mon ami, we ourselves led the man to it. He followed us up the coast road. He watched us go in. And then he burned the whole of it and let us live. Because 2 witnesses who have seen a false motive are worth a great deal more to him than 2 corpses." For perhaps the second time in 15 years, Hercule Poirot was conscious of a sensation he did not care for at all. The small, hot shame of a man who has been handsome and clever and thoroughly used. He permitted himself 30 seconds of it. He found afterwards that he was almost light-headed with relief.
"Bien," he said. "Now, at last, I know what I am hunting. Not an artist, not a madman who wishes the world to hear him. A man who believes that a thing which cannot be played does not exist. Who has spent his life removing a cough here, a stumble there. 12 seconds and it never happened. He does not kill for glory. He kills to edit."
He went to the wall. He took down the photograph of Matteo Rossi, who had smoked a cigar and emptied a tray, and told them so, unasked, before anybody thought to ask.
He took down Sophia Bellini, who had hidden a tin in her shoe for 6 days out of love, and who had been meant to be on the ferry. He took down the lamp boy, the dresser, the stage manager, the 2 orchestral players, the sponsors man from Milan, the doctor from the 4th row, and old Beniamino from the harbour office, who had kept 4 months of flowers for a man named Marek and never once been curious. The string came away with them. He wound it round his hand. One photograph remained upon the plaster, quite alone. A fair, mild man in shirt-sleeves, folded twice, precisely, sitting between 2 grey machines. "Everything is recorded," said Poirot softly, "except that which he has already decided did not occur." Chapter 8. The Bait. The reply from the record office at Brno was 11 lines long, and Ferry read it aloud twice, the second time slowly, as a man does with a thing he does not wish to have misunderstood. Antonin Marek, journalist, born 1874, married 1899. One son, Emile, born 1901. In 1911, the said Marek was the subject of proceedings at the instance of his employers, was certified in 1913, and died in the public asylum at Kromerich in 1919 of pneumonia, aged 45. The widow Marie resumed her maiden name of Novakova in 1914. The child was re-registered accordingly. "Novak," said Ferry. He had gone rather white. "Emile Novak. It is on the passport in that box, signore, with the little accent upon it that our newspapers have never once troubled to print. It has been in the box for 9 days." "It has been in the box," Poirot agreed, "and I have looked at it 4 times, and it told me nothing because a name tells nothing until one knows what it was before. The cuttings came up from Milan the same afternoon, and they told the rest of it in the flat, pleased voice of newspapers of that period." Between 1908 and 1910, a Bohemian journalist had worked upon a series of investigations into the wireless telegraphy concessions of 3 governments: patents, priorities, monies. He had been thorough. He had also been trusting, and had engaged, for the technical portions, a clever Italian of 37 who had access to his notes, his cylinders, and his correspondence. In the autumn of 1910, the whole of that work appeared under the Italian's name. Marek said so. He said so loudly in 3 countries for 18 months. He was answered with actions for libel, which he lost, with the loss of his position, which no other paper would replace, and at last with 2 doctors, who found him excitable, fixed in his ideas, and a danger to the public peace. His wife was advised to consider the child. The clever Italian went on. He founded a company. The company acquired concessions. The concessions became a network. The network, 20 years ago, put on the air a light program of music and conversation called the Orpheus Hour, and its founder spoke the first words of the first broadcast himself. He was 65 now, and a senator, and he had lately been photographed presenting a cup at a regatta. "Fontana," said Ferry. He put the cutting down as though it had grown warm. "Cesare Fontana." "Yes." "Signore, he is—" Ferry gestured helplessly at the world. "He is on the wall of my son's schoolroom." "That," said Poirot, "is precisely the difficulty, and it has been the difficulty for 28 years. He was quiet for some while, looking at nothing. "Consider the boy, Inspector. He is 10 when they begin upon his father in the courts. He is 12 when 2 doctors sign the paper and the door of that place closes. He is 13 when his own name is taken from him and another put on, for his mother's protection, and 18 when the pneumonia finishes it. And thereafter all his life he opens a newspaper and finds the man who did it being congratulated, honoured, photographed at regattas. There is no court that will hear him. There is no year in which the world will consent to be told." Poirot's voice was without any expression whatever. "So he learns the trade of that man's own empire. He becomes very good at it. He is patient for 28 years. And then Gabriel Armand, who is looking for something else entirely, finds a disc in a repository at Milan with a wrong name upon the sleeve, and proposes to give the truth to 2 million people in 13 minutes with no music and call it In Memoriam. And Novak killed him for that, when the man was about to prove it for him. Ah. Poirot lifted one finger. You have asked the correct question at last, mon ami, and it is the question I could not answer for 6 days. Why murder the one man in Europe who was willing to say it aloud? He rose and went to the window and looked down at the harbour where the fishing boats lay tilted on the mud at the low tide. Because it would not have been enough. Understand him. Armand speaks for 13 minutes. There is a scandal, there are lawyers. The old man has lawyers and a ministry and a portrait in every schoolroom in Italy, and in 5 years it is a curiosity, a paragraph, a thing people half remember and get wrong. The Sun does not want a scandal, Inspector. He wants what was taken. He wants the record, every disc, every sleeve, every index card in every cellar in Europe, to be made to say the true name and no other. And that cannot be done while the old recordings exist, because the old recordings say Fontana. He turned round. He is not destroying history. In his own mind, he is correcting the proofs. Poirot went to see him that evening, and asked nothing at all. They sat in the curtained box while Emile Novak coiled cable over and under into loops of exactly equal size. You are from Brno, monsieur? I have a great affection for that country. I knew a man once from Brno, a journalist, I think. There are many journalists, said Novak. There were more, formerly. Novak went on coiling. His hands did not alter their rhythm by anything Poirot could measure, and Poirot was measuring. May I ask you a technical question? When you condemn a disc as unplayable, what becomes of it? It is broken, and the pieces are weighed and the weight is entered. He set the coil down and looked up with his mild grey eyes. It is a good system. Nothing is lost that was not already lost. And the man who signs the certificate, he is never asked to prove it. No, said Emile Novak. Nobody has ever asked. At the door, Poirot paused, as though something had just occurred to him. It is a curious profession, yours, to be the only person who knows what truly happened, and to be paid to remove it. It is not removal, said Novak. A man says the wrong name and corrects himself. Which of the two did he say? The tape keeps both. That is the fault of the tape. He smiled, faintly, for the first time in 9 days. One tidies. Afterwards, what is there is what was. The lie went out on Thursday. Inspector Ferry gave it to the press with the wooden solemnity of a man who has been rehearsed, that a duplicate of one recording from the destroyed material had been lodged by the late Gabriel Armand with a notary at Genoa some weeks before his death, that the police had recovered it that morning, and that it would be played in full during a memorial broadcast from the Teatro Miraggio on Saturday evening at 10 o'clock, together with a statement by Hercule Poirot. It was in the Genoa papers by noon and in the Milan papers by 6. The network, which could not be seen to suppress a memorial to its own dead presenter, agreed to carry it across Europe. There was no notary. There was no duplicate. There had never been anything at Genoa but a telephone call from a policeman to a newspaper. And if he does not come, said Ferry. Then he does not come, and I have told 2 million people a lie, and my reputation is a little smaller. And he wins. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. He will come. He has been patient 28 years for one object, and he has been told that the object exists and will be destroyed by playing it aloud to a continent. He cannot permit that, any more than a man can permit his own house to be burnt while he watches. And he is not, mon ami, a coward. He held the door of a cabinet and let it go. At 2 minutes to 10 on Saturday, the red lamp came on above the proscenium of an opera house with 900 empty seats. Poirot sat alone at the table on the stage, in the pool of one lamp, with the black cylinder 8 inches from his mouth. There were 14 policemen in the building, none of them visible from the stage, and a gramophone turntable at his right hand bearing a disc of dance music with a plain paper sleeve. He did not hurry. He spoke of Gabriel Armand and of a voice that a continent had let into its kitchens for 20 years. He spoke of a man named Antonin Marek, who had been a journalist and had been thorough and had died in 1919 in a public institution at the age of 45, in a country that no longer used that name for itself. Somewhere in Europe, 2 million people had stopped moving about their rooms.
In a moment, said Poirot, I shall play to you a recording made 28 years ago, and you shall hear a man say his own name. He let the silence stand. But first, a word to one listener only. Monsieur, you have labored very long to make the world forget, and tonight the world is listening. If you wish to silence history, monsieur, you must first silence me. Every light in the Teatro Miraggio went out. Not the stage lamp alone. The working lights, the corridors, the foyer, the lantern over the stage door. The dark was total, and it had a smell of hot dust, and in it Poirot did not move at all. The microphone, which was designed to miss nothing, carried to 2 million people the sound of a chair being set down with great care upon boards. Then footsteps, unhurried, crossing the stage from the left. Then the small, dry, entirely unmistakable sound of a pistol being cocked. For 4 seconds, Europe heard nothing whatever but a man breathing. Then the shot. Then silence. Chapter 9. Checkmate. The working lights came up 40 seconds later, and Hercule Poirot was standing 8 feet to the left of where he had been shot at, entirely unharmed, with his hands folded upon his stick. Upon the chair in the middle of the stage, set down, as 2 million people had heard with great care, lay the second microphone, ruined. The bullet had gone through the grille and out at the back and buried itself in the boards. You fired at the only sound in the building, said Poirot. It was a machine, monsieur. You have trusted them all your life, and tonight one of them was breathing for me. Emile Novak stood at the foot of the turntable stand, with the pistol at his side and the paper sleeve in his other hand. He had opened it. It contained a dance record, a waltz, taken rather too fast, which the orchestra of the Teatro Miraggio had recorded in June for use in emergencies. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he laid it down on the stand, quite gently, the way a man puts down something belonging to someone else. There was never any notary, he said. There was never anything at all. Your father's voice went into the fire 8 days ago, monsieur, upon a cliff, by your own hand, along with 11 discs of no importance whatever. I did not know that then. Neither, I think, did you. Novak stood very still. 12 items, said Poirot. You had a list. You searched that building left to right as a man reads, and you were still searching when you gave it up. I heard you give it up, monsieur, from inside a cupboard 4 feet away. Where he had put the box I do not know. Neither, I think, do you. You were in a hurry, because there was a motor car below the cutting that was not yours, and so you did the thing that has always answered before. He paused. You burnt it. And in it was the one object in Europe that could have given your father back his name. The pistol did not move. Nothing in the man's face moved. You are telling me this, he said at last, to be cruel. I am telling you this, said Poirot, because it is true, and because you are the last man alive who has any right to be told a thing that is true. Sit down, Monsieur Marek. He sat. He sat on the edge of the stage with his elbows on his knees and the pistol hanging from his hand, and 14 policemen in the dark of the auditorium who had been instructed, on pain of Ferry's considerable displeasure, not to move until they were told. Poirot did not raise his voice. There was no need. There was a black cylinder 8 inches from him, and the red lamp above the proscenium was still burning.
I shall say what happened. You will correct me where I am wrong. You have corrected worse men than me for 20 years.
6 weeks ago, Gabriel Armand went to the repository at Milan to look for something else entirely and came away with 12 discs, and one of them was a demonstration recording made in 1910 in which a bohemian journalist explains his own work in his own voice and names the young assistant who is with him. That disc was catalogued under the assistant's name because the assistant had catalogued it. Armand understood at once what he had, and he was a decent man and a vain one, and he decided to do the decent thing in the most magnificent manner available to him. 13 minutes, no music, before 2 million people. He told nobody but Mademoiselle Bellini, and he would not tell her the name to protect her. But he required a technician. He came to you. Poirot's hands were quite still upon the stick. That is the cruelty in this affair, monsieur, and neither of us arranged it. He came to the engineer, as he had come to you for 20 years, and asked you to prepare a disc for transmission. And you looked at the sleeve, and you saw your father's voice in the hands of a man who proposed to spend it in one evening. He would have made a scandal of it, said Novak. His voice had no colour at all. A scandal is a fortnight. In the archive it says Fontana. In the index it says Fontana. In the catalogue at Milan. In the sleeve on the card. In every cellar in Europe for 100 years it says Fontana. He would have made a fortnight and gone home pleased with himself. And you wanted the cards altered. I wanted it to be true, said Emile Novak. And for the first time something came into the mild grey eyes that made Ferry, in the dark below, put his hand upon his revolver. Poirot went on evenly. You bought the pastilles he took by the box, in Milan, as everyone in the company knew he did. 2 of them you filled with prussic acid and returned to the bottom of the box, and the box refilled the tin in the ordinary way, and you went away and waited, because a man of regular habit will always in the end arrive at the bottom of anything. You could not choose the hour, nobody could. It was chance that gave you an audience of 2 million. Chance and a habit of 20 years that he took one before he spoke. But when it happened, you were ready for it, because you had been ready for weeks. At 7:30, an envelope was left at the stage door by nobody in particular, containing a flower and a line of black ink, so that a dresser and a callboy should afterwards be able to swear that Gabriel Armand had been threatened by an unknown hand. At 8:30, you knelt at the cable in the announce room for 2 minutes, before a witness, with an excellent reason, and you left a white carnation upon the table. At 10:17, you spoke into his headphones, the one circuit that is not transmitted and is always recorded, so that we should certainly find it and certainly misread it, and when it was done you sat behind your glass with your hand upon the fader, and you let 38 seconds of silence go out to a continent before you brought up the waltz. Any engineer in Europe would have covered it in 4. You gave them 38, monsieur, because you wished 2 million people to have time to understand what it was that they had just heard. The flower was remembrance. You have sent 6 of them every week since April to a man who is dead. The thread was recording tape, which is your trade. The 4 notes were the Day of Judgment, and I was intended to remember another case and to sit in this theatre thinking about an artist. And while I thought about an artist, you went on signing certificates. 161, a fire at Turin, a standpipe at Rome, a lorry on a dry bend near Lyons. Nobody looks at a cellar, monsieur. Everybody looks at a stage. And the boat, said Ferry's voice from the darkness, thick with something. The boat was for Mademoiselle Bellini, who knew the shape of the truth and might one day be believed. The child was in it because the child is always in the harbour at 7, and you had not troubled to learn that, because you were not thinking about children. You were thinking about the record. Poirot's voice sharpened for the first and only time. That is what your correction of the proofs would have cost, monsieur. A girl of 12 who sells flowers.
You did not even see her.
Novak looked down at the boards. No, he said. I did not see her.
One thing you shall tell me, said Poirot, because I have carried it in my pocket for 9 days, and I do not care to take it home with me. The first voice was never the intended one. You knew we should find it.
What did it mean? For a moment he thought the man would not answer. It was not a riddle, said Novak. It was the only true sentence I have spoken since February. He was looking at the boards between his shoes. On that disc there are 2 men talking. The first voice is my father's. It was there first, and it explains everything, and it is 30 seconds long. Then the second voice comes in and asks a question, and the second voice is the one they kept. He turned his hands over and looked at them. That is all it means. The first voice is never the one they keep. For a while, nobody said anything, and the reels in the box at the back of the stalls turned steadily, and Europe listened. You are wrong about one thing, Novak said at last. You believe I did this from grief. I believe you began it from grief. I did it because it works. He lifted his head, and he was not defiant. He was tired in a way that Poirot had seen perhaps 4 times in his life. A cough. A stumble. 12 seconds, and it never happened, and nobody has ever heard the difference. That is not a trick, monsieur. That is the world. My father shouted for 18 months in 3 countries, and they cut him out, and the tape ran on, and it was clean. History belongs to whoever edits it. No, said Poirot. He said it quietly and without any triumph whatever. It belongs to whoever remembers. You have burnt every disc in Europe, monsieur, and you have not touched one thing that matters. I know his name. The inspector knows it. Mademoiselle Bellini knows it. In 11 minutes, a great many newspapers will know it, because the lamp above us has been read since 10 o'clock. And every word that you and I have said tonight has gone out to 2 million people and been recorded in 4 countries by machines that you do not control. Emil Novak turned his head and looked up at the red lamp. He began very quietly to laugh, and then stopped and put his hand over his eyes and sat on the edge of the stage of the Teatro Miraggio like a man who has put down a weight he has carried since he was 12 years old. He laid the pistol on the boards and pushed it away from himself. Antonin Marek, he said into the microphone. My father. Journalist, Brno. Then the police came up out of the dark, and he stood to meet them, and gave no trouble of any kind. Poirot reached across and switched the microphone off. It was the second time in 9 days that he had done it, and he found that his hand was not entirely steady. Chapter 10. The World After. The newspapers of 6 countries required 9 days to decide what had happened, and then decided it wrongly, which Poirot had expected and Ferry had not. They agreed upon the facts, since the facts had been broadcast. What they could not agree upon was the shape. Corriere had a monster. The Paris papers had a tragedy. An English weekly of high seriousness had a symptom of the age, and printed 4 columns upon it by a gentleman who had never been nearer to a cellar full of shellac than his own club. 2 of them called Emil Novak a genius, which he was not. One of them called Antonin Marek a nobody, which was, in the strictest sense, precisely what had been arranged for him in 1913, and Poirot put down the paper and did not finish his coffee. The Senator Cesare Fontana neither confirmed nor denied. He caused to be issued a statement of 2 sentences in which the word regret appeared once and no name appeared at all, and thereafter he was unwell, and remained unwell, and was photographed no more. The ministry announced an inquiry and gave it 3 years, and in the way of inquiries it took a good deal longer. He died before it reported, and the obituaries, which had been written years earlier and kept in a drawer, the whole trade of memory being a filing system after all, were quietly rewritten overnight by men who had admired him on Tuesday. The 4 remaining broadcasts of the anniversary tour, the cathedral city in Provence, the spa in the mountains, the university town upon the Rhine, the great studio in Paris, were not cancelled, since nothing is ever cancelled. They were postponed, and then reconsidered, and then quietly not spoken of again. And the sponsors discovered that they had wished all along to mark the anniversary with a scholarship. They took Novak out along the coast road at 8 in the morning, because there is no other way out of Porto Miraggio. He was composed. He had eaten his breakfast. He had asked, and been permitted, to wear his own collar.
At the car he stopped and turned, and Poirot came forward, and the carabiniere holding his elbow had the grace to look at the sea. "I am not going to ask you to forgive it," said Novak. "That is as well, monsieur. It is not in my gift, and you would not accept it if it were." Novak nodded slowly. He seemed to be assembling something and finding it heavier than he had supposed. "One question, then. You have my father's name in your head, and you are the only man in Europe who went and looked for it." His voice remained perfectly level. "Did he matter?" Poirot did not answer at once. He had been asked a great many questions in his life by men on their way to prison, and most of them had been about themselves. "He matters now," he said. Emil Novak looked at him for a moment. Then he got into the car, and it went up through the limestone cutting, and the dust hung in the sunlight for a long while after the sound of it had gone. He was tried at the assizes at Genoa in April. He offered no defence, corrected the prosecution twice on points of technical fact, and was silent otherwise. Poirot gave evidence for 1 hour and 40 minutes and was thanked by the court, and afterwards walked out into the rain and stood in it, which was not at all like him. Sophia Bellini was cleared, in the only sense that matters upon a Saturday night in front of 2 million people, and in the smaller and slower sense by the magistrate at Genoa some weeks later, who observed that concealment of the tin had been foolish and was not disposed to say more, having had a mother himself. Gabriel Armand left her the archive. It was not money. There was less of that than anybody expected, the great voice of Europe having been generous, sentimental, and hopeless with an envelope. It was 11,000 discs, 4 cabinets of index cards, and a lease on a room in Milan. She gave up producing and took it, and spent the autumn on her knees on a concrete floor, with a lamp and a list, checking what remained against what the certificates said had been destroyed. She found, in November, that 7 items condemned in March were still in their sleeves, filed under the wrong year. Novak had been thorough but not infallible, and a man correcting proofs will always, in the end, miss a line. None of the 7 was the Marek disc. She wrote to tell Poirot so, and he read the letter twice and answered it the same evening, which he did not do for archbishops. Matteo Rossi began, that winter, to take a coffee at 11 on the days the Milan train came in. Sophia began to be on it, once a month, with her lists. They talked at first about the case, and then about the café, and by the following summer they had established a silence between them of the durable kind, which is not the same as having nothing to say. Rosa went to school. There was a fund, subscribed by listeners in 11 countries, who had heard a man die and wished to do something about it, and it was called after Gabriel Armand and administered with fierce propriety by Inspector Ferry. She objected to the arrangement on principle and continued to sell flowers on Saturdays, having no intention of being anybody's charity, and at 14 she was first in the province in arithmetic, which surprised nobody who had ever tried to shortchange her. Ferry kept the tin ashtray. It sat on his desk at the Questura for the rest of his career, with paper clips in it, and when young officers asked him about it, he told them, and they never afterwards explained a fact away in his hearing. In Genoa, a young man of 26 named Fontana came to see Sophia at the archive and asked whether he might read the papers. He read for 2 days. On the second evening, he asked her, with great difficulty, whether she supposed his grandfather had ever, at any point in 50 years, forgotten it. Sophia said she did not know,
"No," he said, "nor do I. That is the thing I shall have to live with." Truth liberates, and truth wounds, and it very seldom troubles to do them one at a time. Poirot came home to Whitehaven Mansions in the last week of September. Georges had aired the flat, arranged the correspondence in 3 piles of ascending unpleasantness, and procured a marrow, concerning which he had views. The rooms were exactly as they had been left. Poirot walked through them slowly and adjusted the clock on the mantelpiece by perhaps a 1/16 of an inch, and moved a chair back into its proper relation with the fire, and found that these operations gave him rather less satisfaction than usual. He made his coffee. He set the cup precisely at the centre of the saucer, and the saucer square to the edge of the table, and sat down. Somewhere in the building, a wireless was playing dance music. He thought of a man's last breath going out to 2 million kitchens. He thought of 11,000 discs, and of the ones that were ash. He thought of a boy of 12 in Brno reading a newspaper in which a thief was congratulated, and of what that boy had grown into, and of the fact that the world had had 28 years in which to prevent it, and had used them for regattas. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes. He permitted himself one long sigh, weary and not at all elegant, and heard by nobody at all. Then he opened them again. He set the sugar tongs parallel to the spoon. He touched each point of the moustache in turn, and was reassured. There would be crimes tomorrow. There always were. It was, when one considered it honestly, the only entirely dependable feature of the arrangement. Porto Miraggio woke that morning beneath another impossible sky. The boats went out before light, as they had gone out before the theatre was built, and would go out after it fell down. Children chased the pigeons across the piazza. The opera house advertised a season of Verdi and a lecture upon the tunny fisheries. Tourists photographed the harbour and complained about the coast road, and old Beniamino wrote down every arrival in a ledger nobody would read. Almost nobody in the town knew how near it had come to being the place where the memory of Europe was quietly amended. Out beyond the mole, the sea glittered without any expression whatever. The bells of Santa Chiara rang 8. And from an open window above the market, where a woman was shelling beans and not listening at all, a wireless crackled and found its station and began to speak.